Wonderful song dealing with the idea that Christ wants you, and Jesus Christ wants you to understand His love for you, and that it doesn't matter what you've done, He wants you to come and understand His forgiveness and to trust Him as your personal Savior. As many of us, listen, you can look around and say, well, these people, they've got it all together. No, we don't. We're a bunch of sinners saved by grace. We've got problems. We've got issues. But we know one thing. Jesus Christ, the day that He finally helped us to understand who He was, that He is our God, that He died to pay our sin debt, that He laid His life down. He didn't have to do that. He was willingly laid His life down to die in my place, to die in your place. The moment you come to that realization, it's not just practicing religion, it's not just going to church. It's a relationship daily that you can have with the God of the universe. Jesus Christ loved you enough to die in your place and to rise again from the dead, offering us eternal forgiveness for sin. Have you experienced that in your life yet? So I know about it. If it's just up here and not in here yet, you need to transition this. You need to get this up and down in here. You need to trust Christ as your Savior. And so appreciate that. Thank you, Micah, for that song. And well, I'm moving out for this next month or so, from Mother's Day to Father's Day. We're moving out of Hebrews, and I'm going to be preaching through a series on the home and parenting and different topics related to marriage. And so today is the kickoff of this, being Mother's Day. And again, I want to just take time to thank you, moms. We'll say more about that near the end of the service. But during this message is to all mothers, but it should also be something that if you're here as a young man, if you're here as a father, don't check out. This is good information for you to also hear. And something, if you're not married yet, you should listen, looking for the principles and the values you should look for in a future mate. And this is not an exhaustive message by any means, but I'm actually talking about one woman in particular and her testimony in particular, and how God used her, and her son became a son who saved the nation. And yet we just kind of walk through a little bit of her life. And so if you have your Bibles, Exodus chapter number 1. Exodus, Old Testament, Genesis, Exodus. We're going way back. Exodus chapter number 1. And as you're turning there to find that, I want to just give you some introductory notes. The woman's name is not mentioned until further in this text, actually several chapters later. But we figure out who she is pretty quickly, and I'll explain who she is here in just a moment. But today I would like to present to you a mother who is faced with quite a dilemma of letting her child go way before the mother would naturally want to let her child go. Now, knowing my own mother and knowing my own wife, moms typically don't want to let their children go. We had the privilege last night, somewhere after midnight, 2 of our boys snuck home from college. It's nice when they sneak back home to come into the house instead of sneaking out the house. You know, I understand that. But they left with permission, and they came back to a jubilant mother who was sleeping through this whole thing, as well as I. And then this morning, as I was studying, heard footsteps coming down the stairs, and typically it's either Jonathan or Joel who's still at home, but it was Jeffrey and Jake. And they looked, and I was like, oh, and so I got to get up and give them a big hug, and they said, is it okay if we go see Mom? And I said, yeah, she's probably, and right when we were getting ready to go in there, my wife lets out her typical morning, sweet, angelic voice of, are you bringing me my coffee? And I said, yes, 2 big cups. And they went in, and it was like Hallmark moment, picture perfect, awesome. They jumped in the bed with Mom and gave her her hugs and flowers. They brought flowers home. And way to go, guys. That'll be remembered for a very long time. And so we appreciate, but I know from just talking with my wife and my own mother and just knowing the heart of moms, I want to bring this message because I don't think any mother here could fully comprehend what this mother went through. But it's important that we understand there's values and principles we can learn from the Old Testament characters. The New Testament tells us that God put the stories of the Old Testament characters in the Bible so we can learn from them, both the good and the bad. He wanted us to be able to see, all right, other people have gone through what you've gone through. They've been through situations you've been through, and how do we learn both the positive and negatives, what to do, what not to do? And so it's a great opportunity for us to study this one mother in particular, but we're also going to speak of 2 other women in context of this story. So as we take some time to draw attention to those whom God ordained to bring life into this world, speaking of mothers, I thought it fitting to speak of the faith of a mother who had the joy of birthing a beautiful baby boy during a very tumultuous time, and by faith had to let that boy go, trusting that God would care for him. Our mothers don't get enough credit for the risks and the efforts that go into child rearing. Today I would like to introduce you to a woman named Jochebed. As we say it in the American English language, her name actually is pronounced Jochebed. And if you're in Exodus chapter number 1, it does not mention her name in chapter 2 until we get to chapter number 6. So if you'll turn with me quickly to chapter 6 and verse number 20. Exodus chapter 6 and verse number 20. And this is her husband spoken of here first. And Amram took him, Jochebed, his father's sister, to wife, and she bare him Aaron and Moses. And the years of the life of Amram were 137 years. That was a long life, obviously. And we see that not only Moses and Aaron, but also their sister Miriam. And so we see the three that were in this particular family that were mentioned here. So we go back to chapter number 1, and this is where we'll begin. To give you just a little more background on Jochebed, her name means Jehovah is glory. And there are a lot of name associations in the Old Testament. And even today, sometimes people choose names that associate, whether it's just a family name or it's a name that means something to them. And that was more particular back in the Bible times. But her name means Jehovah is glory. She comes from a family of Levi. Later on, even future of her current position, her family would be the family that would assist the priests. They were the Levites in the Levitical priesthood. Her family would be those who would assist the priests in the wilderness tabernacle. And so she comes from a line or she would actually be at the beginning of the line of those who would serve in the tabernacle and also in the temple. So she was a daughter of Levi, one of the 12 sons of Jacob. And these are the 12 tribes of Israel. And so while they're in captivity in Egypt, Joseph now has passed on. Joseph was the key character, and while Joseph was there, as many of you know the story, he rose into second rank in all the kingdom of Egypt. And this was a massive kingdom, folks. It's hard for us to truly imagine and fathom how the picture that is placed here, that Joseph, a Jew, an Israelite, if you would, rose up to such a position. And we don't have time to give that backstory. But this would be one of the brothers of her father, so it would have been an uncle. He passes away, and there goes through a period of time where the next Pharaoh that rises up did not know Joseph. While the Pharaoh that lived knew Joseph, he had good relations with him, but then time went by, and it tells us in the story that Joseph's family kind of fell out of graces with the new Pharaoh. So let's pick it up here in Exodus chapter number 1. And I want to skip down here to verse number 6. Exodus chapter 1, verse number 6. And Joseph died and all his brethren in all that generation. And the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly and multiplied and waxed exceeding mighty, and the land was filled with them. In other words, they kept having children. They kept having babies. And because they were so fruitful in the area of childbirth, they started, their population started growing so vast that the Egyptians now started getting scared. What if they realize they're bigger than we are? What if they realize they could try and take us over? And so the Pharaoh, here we read on here in verse number 8, now there arose a new king over Egypt, which knew not whom? Joseph. And he said to the people, behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply. And it come to pass that when there falleth out a war, they join also unto the enemies and fight against us. So get them up out of the land. So the first idea was, let's get them out of here. Let's say, all right, move out, get out of here. But knowing they've been there now for many, many years and they've established homes, therefore, verse number 11, therefore did set over them taskmasters to afflict them. and with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. And the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. And they were grieved because of the children of Israel. So the Pharaoh is now getting even more nervous. It doesn't matter what he did to them. The population kept growing. He couldn't stop the growth of this population. In verse number 13, and the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor. And they kept putting the pressure on them, putting more pressure on them in order to suppress them. And they made their lives bitter with hard bondage in mortar and in brick and in the manner of service in the field and all their service wherein they made them serve with rigor. And the king of Egypt spake to the Hebrew midwives, of the which name of one was Shiphrah, and the other was Puah. And he said, when ye do the office of a midwife to the Hebrew women, and see them upon the stools, if it be a son, ye shall, say it with me, kill him. But if it be a daughter, then she shall live. What is amazing thought was the first idea we get of population control. The Egyptian king, seeing that there was no recourse, no matter what we do to these people, they keep producing more children. And so he now tasked the Hebrew midwives, the women who would go in as the nurses to deliver these babies. They were trained in that. And they would go in to deliver these babies. And they were to put to death a son and allow a daughter to live. Now you're asking someone to now annihilate, if you would, to eradicate their own kind, their own race. Fortunately, these women would not do it. And God blessed them in other ways, but I want to focus now on Jochebed, if you would, for a few moments. I want you to notice, first of all, about Jochebed, and this all ties into motherhood, but not in the same context, obviously. But I want you to notice, first of all, that she was a desperate woman. She was a desperate woman. No doubt, the day and age in which she lived, seeing and understanding that she was going to bear a child now, and this child was going to, if the midwife would have done the job that the Pharaoh had ordered her to do, that her son would die. He would be killed immediately. In verse number 9 and 10, we notice that the Pharaoh feared the Israelites that would try to take over his kingdom because they were multiplying, and so he came up with this plan. He just wanted to get rid of them because they couldn't get rid of them. He put more labor on them because that didn't stop anything. He made this edict to then put to death the children. Notice now verse 15, in verse number 15 and 16, we already read it, that he had talked about exterminating the male children. Now I want you to notice in verse number 17, it says, but the midwives feared God and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the men children alive. Here, Shiphrah and Puah, and I think they're not spoke on much as we study the scriptures, but we have to understand here is two women that said, no way. We value life way more than what you're giving us credit for. We're not going to take the lives of children that God brought into this world. It would be a good lesson for our current day to understand the same thing. Matter of fact, today kicks off for us in our own community. We have a group called CareNet, and from Mother's Day to Father's Day, we usually have baby bottles, and we have them out there. If you'd like to take one today, you can take one and fill those up with coins and bring those back. That's a local community group that is a nonprofit, and they offer guidance to young women who find themselves in a place of should we abort or should we give the baby up for adoption? And they counsel them to give the babies up for adoption, to get the proper health care they need and help them out. They try to help them to see that this is a valuable life and this is something that should be preserved and presented. And we know of many mothers who could not bear their own children, and because of adoption or fostering, they've been able to fulfill that God-given desire, and they've done a wonderful job with raising children who are not their own, but they became their own. And we have to understand there's great programs out there that value life. And so I thank God for the Shiphrahs and the Puahs of our day, and the Shiphrah and the Puah here that were not willing, even under death themselves, they were not willing to violate God's law about life. And so we appreciate that. But here we have, going back to Jochebed, a woman who is in a desperate situation. She brought a child into the world in a desperate time. And her situation was desire, but she was willing to trust the Lord. How willing was she to trust the Lord? She hid her child. And I can imagine that she was not the only one. There most likely were other women in the same position as she was at this particular time, but this is the one that's recorded for us in the Scriptures. And the question comes up in our mind sometimes, when is it right to obey governing authorities of the land? And the answer that is very simply put in the Scriptures is when they are trying to force you to go against God's values. You have to decide to take a stand for what God says is right, not what someone else is forcing you to think what is right. And you have that right as a believer to say, you know what? I'm willing to go to prison. I'm willing to lose certain things because I have values that God placed in my life. I'm not going to just buy into what the world says is the right values. I'm willing to take a stand on what's right based on my answer to God someday. And it's important that we understand that now. Moms and dads, teach that to your children now. Just because the school says this, just because the government says this, just because your friends say this, just because other parents say this, you are responsible to God first and foremost. Don't just settle for what the world tells you, because as you look out in the world, it's a nasty place sometimes. Their values don't line up with God's values. And there may be more desperate times coming where you have to decide what is right on behalf of what God says, not on behalf of what our government says or what other people say. You must decide. I don't care what the system is. You have the right to decide based on what God tells you is the right thing to do based on His laws and His word. And so when others transgress God's laws, you have a right to take a stand for what God calls right. So a desperate woman, the time she lived in, it was a desperate time, it was a desperate situation. I can't imagine any mother here, if you went down to Ellen Hospital, if you had a child born at Bacchus Hospital, and they said, if your child is born a male, you'll never see that child. We're going to take that child from you. Well, we're going to put it to death. There's not a man or woman in this room that would stand by and say, oh, okay. You'd have to have 10 men to hold me down if you say that's what you're going to do to my wife. We would find somewhere else, we would find some other way to bring this life into the world. But I want you to see the reality of the situation where she was at. This is where she was. And so we see that she was a desperate woman, but I also want you to notice then she was a determined woman. She wasn't allowed the dictates of this king to allow her to give up her child that easily. Turn with me to Exodus chapter 2 and verse number 1. It says, and there went a man of the house of Levi, this is talking about her husband, and took the wife of the daughter of Levi, this is talking about Jehoram and Jehoram. And the woman conceived and bare a son, and when she saw that he was a goodly child, she hid him for how long? 3 months. Now, any of you that have a child born in this world, what's typical after a child's born in this world? What do? They cry. They make noise. And they need to be fed. They need to be changed. And if there are any spies going around, and as we learn little bits and pieces about the history of that time, there was no doubt people that were willing to make deals with the empire and try to turn over people who were not going along with the program. And they had soldiers coming through once in a while, checking houses, and there were no rights. For 3 months, this mother was determined to keep her child as safe as she possibly could. For 3 months, and I don't know a mom in here that wouldn't do the same thing, who would try to find some way of protecting their baby that was not able to stand on its own. But then they got so desperate that she realized, and we don't know the rest of the story, but the pressure was on. And she came to the point with the only thing she could do, instead of laying her baby on the shore of the Nile River, which was the next command that came out, to cast the babies into the Nile River and give them to the alligator gods. That was the command. And the midwives were to do that, and they refused to do that. And so instead of just laying her baby down on the edge of the shoreline and waiting for some beast or animal or a little lap of water to come up and wash their baby away, can you imagine that as a mother? She said, I'll build my baby a little ark, a little papyrus boat. And they had slime pits, tar. She put this pitch on it in order to get it to be water resistance, and she sealed it. She put a lid on it. She takes it down to the side of the water, and I'm sure with tears, I'm sure with everything couldn't even put it down at first. Finally, when she put it down, probably picked it up again, probably opened that basket up again and grabbed that baby again. Think 3-month-old. Some of you have them in here. Some of them are up here on the stage. What do you do to a defenseless, beautiful, fully functioning baby at that point? Put that little baby back in that basket. And this was a woman of faith. Lord, they're coming to get him. I'd rather leave him in your hands than shove that little basket out. I mean, I'm a dad, and I could not even imagine. I'd rather fight and die at that moment than give my child up even to a river. But yet that's what this woman finally felt so pressured to do. And Miriam, Moses' older sister, stands on the riverside and watches that little basket start floating down the river. And it starts floating down the river. It's going to go by the palace. It's going to go by the palace where the Pharaoh's daughter comes out and bathes herself with her whole entourage. As Miriam is in the reeds watching what's going to happen to her little baby brother, helpless. I'm sure the thoughts of that mother probably not want to block it out, go back to my home and just cry and just block out. I don't know he could already be drowned, he could already been eaten, and we don't know. And yet, this woman gives up her child. And her sister follows the little boat down the river to see what's going to happen. And to their delight, the Pharaoh's daughter was out there bathing and retrieved the basket, heard the cry. The cry had to come at the perfect time, the perfect moment. So he moved from a determined woman who is no doubt still determined to a delighted woman. When word finally got back, Miriam came back. You have to understand, Miriam came back with a story to tell. And it's a story of God's providence. God's providence, how he took care when Jochebed finally says, God, I just have to trust you for the life of my child. Instead of just throwing the baby into the water and just getting over it quickly, instead of killing the baby themselves, say, Lord, he's in your hands. She's in your hands, Lord. Every parent needs to take a lesson from this mother right now. There's going to come a point in a time when you just have to say to God, she's yours. He's yours. We have done what we could do. They're old enough to make their own decisions. You're not going to agree, moms and dads, with every decision your kid makes. I don't agree with my own decisions sometimes. But surely you think you know better than your kids, and in most cases you do. But guess what? Some cases you have to let them make their own decisions, good or bad. So yeah, but I want to save them from all the pain. I get it. I hear you. I'm there with you. But in some cases, we'll just be there to pick up the pieces. And that's not a time for I told you so. They don't need that lecture after they've made a major mess of their life. You know what they need? They need you to just stand there and say, come on. I'm no better than you. I've made my own mistakes. I love you. And it'll hurt. And every bone in your body is saying, I want to just tell them, I told you. Why didn't you listen to me? How come you would do that? Didn't we teach you better? All the momisms come back. All the dadisms come back. And that's not a time for that. That's a time to say, we're sinful humans and we make some stupid mistakes in life. Or you could judge them. You give them the attaboy, the I told you so. You can give them the Bible thumper lesson. Let me tell you, love works way better. Way better. You can ostracize them, you could shun them, you could kick them out. Okay. I've been in it long enough. I've been around people long enough. I've been around families long enough. I've made all these mistakes. And at some point in time, there will be that burning in your heart. I wonder if they'd ever forgive me. I wonder if, why would I need forgiveness? Because you were supposed to be the example of God to them. They may step on you. They may stamp on you. They may spit in your face, moms. They may tell you everything nasty about you and how you did everything wrong and how they hate you. And you remember, that's exactly what we did to Jesus Christ. And he said, I know you can't fully understand this, and I'm willing to die in your place. That's called grace. That's called mercy. That's called love. That's not natural to me. That's not natural to you. That has to be something that you walk with God to get. But when you offer that type of acceptance back to someone who deserves to be struck down, or someone who deserves the lecture of a lifetime, and you just say, I love you, we'll get through this somehow, that can start changing things. And you'll have to fight the desire of the what-fors and I told you so's. And that's going to be your battle. Their battle is picking up the pieces and trying to fix the scars, which they may never fix. They may have ruined some things that will never change, and you'll have to just now, okay, we got all these pieces, they don't fit back together right, but you're ours, we love you. We'll just keep going from here. And you may win the next generation. But if you shun them, if you shut them out, if you don't accept them, you may never even have access to the next generation of your own progeny, your own ancestry. You may lose opportunities because you wanted to be the right one and you wanted to be in their face and you wanted to tell them the what for. Be careful. And we're all made of flesh. Hey, kids, if we do that to you as parents, learn to forgive us too. We're human. We're no different than you. We're just older and uglier. That's it. So you just have to get used to that. Why was she such a delighted woman? Let me go back to the text. Exodus chapter 2, verse number 4. And his sister. So Moses, and if I didn't tell you, by the way, we're talking about Moses. And Moses is the child that's in the basket, and his sister Miriam stood afar off to wit, in other words, in order to watch and to see, to understand what would be done to him. And the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself in the river, and her maidens walked along the riverside. And when she saw the ark among the flags, in other words, it got stuck in the bulrushes and in the cat nine tails, or whatever you want to call them, she sent her maid to fetch it. Yeah, because she knew there's alligators. She wasn't going out there. She was smart enough to say, you go get that basket. And verse number 6, and when she had opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the babe wept. And you can see in Pharaoh's daughter the heart of a mother. I don't know about you, but when a baby cries, now sometimes when babies cry, it just irritates me. But there's other times a baby will cry, and what's wrong? What can we do to fix it? What do they need? And this is the heart of this young woman. But she opened it, saw the child, the babe wept, and she had compassion on him and said, this is one of the Hebrew children. She knew. She knew this was a Hebrew child. Remember, 8th day of a Hebrew boy, they would get circumcised. The pagans back then, they didn't do circumcision. So she would have known a few identifying marks. She also would have known that an Egyptian person probably would not have put their baby in that. They would have just thrown their baby to the crocodiles. They actually did that. Crazy, some of the stories that you learn in history. And so we recognize that she understood this was a Hebrew child, and she had a decision to make at that moment. And we thank God that God was in this, and that baby found favor in her eyes. What a great picture of us in our God. You realize we have nothing to offer to our God? We really don't. Say, what would God want from me? I offer him nothing clean. I offer him nothing good. And we try to human it. Well, yeah, you're a pastor, you're this, you're that. No. What do I have to offer the God of the universe? Nothing. I can't give him a gift nice enough. I can't serve him enough. I can't do anything to honor a God. But he gives me the privilege to honor him. He gives me the privilege to try. And so what we find then is that Miriam is viewing all this and sees, and guess what Miriam does? I don't know, how should I love to hear that story when I get to heaven someday? But she finally goes over, and I don't know if she's just nonchalant, and, oh, look, you found a basket. What's in the basket? Oh, come on, use your imagination. How did she get in with the Pharaoh's daughter here and be able to get that close without guards saying, who are you, what are you doing here? But God, there's so many little details of the story we don't know, but how cool is it? And she gets close enough to the Pharaoh's daughter to say, I know a nursing mom. You want me to go get her? Yes. And I'll pay her to raise this child. Moms, you need to go lay your baby down somewhere and then have your daughter go. No, never mind. You know, the estimate, I think this is a dated estimate a couple of years ago, but what the mom's value if they worked in the real world based on all the things that moms do around their house. Now, this might not be the case for every mom, but your annual income should be $100,000 a year, moms. Church, you need to pay me more. I got to pay this woman a lot more. No, I'm just kidding. But you recognize, when you start considering all that moms do for their kids, it's endless, it's amazing. The more that I see the women in our church, the more that I see my own mother and others, I just realize the value that God put into a woman to raise a child. There's just nothing like it in the world. And it's a wonderful, wonderful thing to be able to observe and see. I've got to stop here in just a few moments. All right, so we have a delighted woman. Why is she so delighted? Marion comes back and says, listen, God saw your faith and he led this baby right down to Pharaoh's daughter. And guess what? Mom, guess what? She gave me permission to come hire someone to go back and feed the baby. And guess who that's going to be? You! And you get to keep the baby until he's weaned. And they estimate 5 or 6 years old that she got to keep her child. An amazing story. She was a delighted mother. But during that time, this is really what I want to talk to you about more so, but I don't have time now. What do you think she tried to instill in the heart? If you as a mom knew right now that your child would be taken from you at 5 or 6 years old, what would you be instilling in the heart of that child? What would you be trying to get that child, 5 or 6 year old, they're out, they're gone. They're going into a pagan environment, absolutely pagan environment. Moms, what would you want to instill in the heart of your children? Your values, your principles, messages about your God, your Savior, Jesus Christ. Well, don't let a tumultuous situation like this, don't let life just pass you by. Invest in them like you're only going to have them until they're 5. And if you get 5 more years, keep investing in them. And if you get 5 more years, that's only 15. Keep investing in them. And when they're at 18, they're ready to leave home, wow, have you invested in the life of that child? 3 times longer than Jochebed got to invest in hers. And look how God used him to deliver 2 million people from slavery someday. That was 80 years later. But it took God working in this situation. What would you invest in your child if you only had 5 years with them? Your faith, your family values, your personal values, the songs that a mother sings to their child. What do your songs teach? Not just what you turn on the radio. What do your songs teach your children about your faith, about your values, about your morals? If you had your child in for 5 years, what would they remember about what you sang to them and what you taught them? What are you teaching your children now at this time in your particular life? And then last thing, and I want to just make this and we'll conclude. A diminished woman. Why is she diminished? Well, the idea of diminishing is to lessen. And moms is something that you all need to come to grips with. I have to come to grips with this even as a father. My influence in my children's life will become less and less. You can fight it or you can embrace it. Do all you can right now to invest in them. Don't hover. Don't be a helicopter mom. Always hovering. Now, you do that for a while. But at some point, your children have to take some risks. You have to be there now to guide. You know the bumpers in bowling? They put the bumpers up. You go bowling. Some of you understand this? They bounce the ball back and forth. Still don't get a strike every time, but you understand. It keeps it from going in the gutter. That's kind of how we act sometimes. But then we get to a certain point where the rails are off. They're going to have to make their own decisions. And you're now there at the end, down in the gutter, saying, all right, Let's fix the pieces. Let's do our best. Some of it's unfixable. But the morals and values and principles you put in them over time hopefully become their own faith in God, their own values. And then you're just there to guide. You're not there to control. You're there to guide. So the diminished woman, the idea I meant by that is she had to finally give that child over. And I have a twofold reality check for raising children. You are required to give them back to God, Mom. You're required to give them back to God. You train them for a time, but they're God's. Not only that, but you're going to give them to somebody else, a spouse. If it's a daughter, you're giving it to a husband, a man. If it's a wife, you're giving it to, did I say that right? A man or a woman? You know what I'm talking about. Understand this, you're going to give them up someday. Invest all you can, but do it in a loving way. Do it in a great way. Hey, kids, make it easier on us as parents. We know we're messed up. You can laugh at us behind the scenes. Don't laugh in our face. But listen, you're going to be a parent someday, and you're going to say, oh my goodness, I did not realize how tough this was. Oh my goodness, I did not realize how hard this is letting go. I wish I could correct the mistakes I made on my kids, but I can't. And there's some things you're going to have to forgive us for. You'll be giving them back to God, you'll be giving to a spouse. A mother's impact on a child sets the course for that child's future. Your capacity to influence the child when they're young is the greatest capacity for your influence. As they get older, they'll have many other teachers, many other influences. And sometimes then you just become, once in a while, a guidepost for them. But it's great that they can look back and say, I know what Mom and Dad would say. And they may not ask you, but they know in their mind what Mom and Dad would say. If it's a good thing, that's good. Her desire was to see him at family events. Her desire was to see him and keep tutoring him and to watch him grow, but she wasn't able to see all that. And just in a closing illustration, there are several animals that I thought were interesting illustrations for how they protect and care for their own children. There's a poison frog. I can't remember what tropical environment it's in, but this poison frog lays her eggs. And usually about 5 eggs get fertilized, and she carries those eggs up to the top of a tree. And she feeds them, or the sac contains enough nutrients to get them to start developing as tadpoles. But then as they start eating outside of the egg, but not fully developed to go back down into the stream or on the ground, she lays fake eggs that are there for the nutrients, and the offspring eat those eggs from this tree frog. And just talking about how God has prepared nature even to keep providing for children up to a certain point, and then they're finally able to drop off this tree down into a creek. And think about this, nature, how God has planned that these animals by instinct just know what to do. We have the chimpanzees. They carry their offspring for 2 years. Feed them for 2 years. Up to 7 years, the young chimpanzees stay with their moms and learn from their moms. But then for life, those chimpanzees will keep coming and checking in with their mom. And I know many moms would love to have their kids just check in with them once in a while. Let them know you love them. Thirdly, no inference here, but the gray whale travels thousands of miles with their new offspring to get them out of shark-infested waters by instinct. Thousands of miles, not eating. The mother does not eat, but she has stored up enough energy, fat, to produce the milk for her calf. As they travel, this calf nurtures off her mother through this whole time as she gets down to warmer waters in a place where they know that the young calf is safe. And the mother is said to lose 8 tons of weight during this process. And some of you moms, I know I'm treading on dangerous water here, very thin ice. But you understand what the baby weight is. Not that any of you could lose 8 tons of it, okay? I get that. But here we have, even in nature shows us the willingness, moms that would not even eat to provide for their own child, to get them to safer havens. Then lastly, and probably the most sacrificial, spiders. Now, I know people don't like spiders, but listen to this, moms. After a spider lays her eggs, she eats food, regurgitates it so her baby spiders can eat. And then in the ultimate sacrifice, at some point, she rolls over on her back and she allows her own babies to eat her. You say, Pastor, this is horrible. How do you end a message like this? I don't know, I just did. But I just find it fascinating that even nature shows the sacrificial heart of mothers. And I've met some, sadly, that don't have the mother instinct. Not here, that I know of. But it's a wonderful tribute to you that you've raised up kids. Perfect? Absolutely not. Why? Because we're not perfect. Loved? Yeah. Do we all love properly? Nope. But I want to say thank you to the moms that are here today. And just in closing, could I have all the moms stand? And I know that some of you are wonderful. Go ahead. Just stand up if you're a mom. We just want to recognize you. I want to have a special word of prayer for you. And I know by saying this too, we have some folks, if you're a foster mom or you've adopted, and that's all that, very much welcome. Some of you mother people, even though you don't have your own children, you're a mother to some, and I appreciate that spirit. But let me have a special word of prayer for you, include the message, and we have just a couple more things to take care of before we leave here today. Father, I want to thank you for each one of these mothers, and knowing, Lord, we even have some ladies in our church that could not have their own children, and being sensitive, but knowing that they have invested in other people's lives as well. And I thank you for that spirit. But they also had moms that invested in their life, and they've learned some great things from their own mothers. We ask that for each one of these moms that you would bless them and strengthen them and encourage their hearts. May they enjoy the moments they have with their children, especially if the kids are older and on their own. And may you help them to keep praying and keep investing and influencing the best way possible, even if it's from a distance. For the younger moms, will you give them grace and the love that only you can bestow upon them to share with